Some stories find you at the right time. This one found me years ago, told by an old rancher in Arizona who swore it happened to his grandfather's neighbor. I cannot prove it, but I believe it. It is a simple story about two people who saw each other clearly in a world determined to look the other way, about hands that knew work, about silence that said more than words ever could. If you have ever felt invisible, truly invisible in a room full of people, you will understand Silas West. If you have ever done something kind without thinking, without expecting anything in return, you will understand Clara Mills. This is not a tale of gunfights or gold. It is quieter than that. But sometimes the quietest stories are the ones that stay with us longest. Pull up a chair. Let me tell you what happened. The boy selling newspapers saw him first. Silas West rode into Redwater on a horse that should have been retired 3 years ago. The animal moved slow, deliberate, like it was counting each step and wondering how many it had left. Dust clung to its coat. Red Arizona dust that smelled of iron and dry creosote. The same dust clung to the man his shoulders, his hat, the deep creases around his eyes. But the boy was not looking at the dust. He was looking at the boots. The leather had cracked open at the toe, splitting like dried creek bed in summer. Old stitching hung loose, threads dangling with each sway of the stirrup. Through the gap, a wool sock showed gray and thin. The boy covered his mouth, laughed into his palm. Silas did not look at him. He guided the horse down Main Street. The smell of the town wrapped around him, horse manure baking in the afternoon heat, bacon grease from the boarding house kitchen, tobacco smoke drifting from the saloon porch where someone plunked out a ragtime tune on an old piano. The notes floated through the swinging doors, mixing with men's laughter and the clink of whiskey glasses. Women in clean dresses turned to stare as he passed. A child pointed. Her mother pulled her hand down, whispered something sharp. Silas kept riding. The evening sun threw long shadows across the wooden buildings. Somewhere behind him, the church bell rang 6 times, slow and heavy, each strike hanging in the warm air like a question waiting to be answered. He stopped in front of a board nailed to a post outside the town hall, words painted in black ink. He read them twice. Marriage auction tomorrow, 2 o'clock. All eligible women of Redwater highest bidder takes bride. His jaw tightened, just slightly, then it relaxed. He turned the horse toward the inn at the end of the street. A kerosene lamp hung outside, already lit against the coming dark, its flame dancing behind smoky glass. The sign above the door read, Miller's Boarding, in letters so faded they look like they might blow away with the next strong wind. Inside, a man with a belly that tested his suspenders looked up from a ledger. The smell of boiled coffee and old cigars hung thick in the air. "Help you, stranger." Silas reached into his coat, pulled out coins, counted them on the counter, one by one. Got a room for the night. The innkeeper looked at the coins, looked at the boots. His lip curled, just a fraction. Got one in back. No window. $1.50. He scratched his chin. Reckon that's about what you can afford. By the look of things. That'll do. Stable's 50 cents extra. Horse can stay outside. She's used to it. The innkeeper slid a key across the counter. Brass, worn smooth from years of hands. End of the hall. Don't expect breakfast. And don't go causing trouble. Silas picked up the key. His hand was rough, calloused. The kind of hand that had gripped rope and shovel and leather reins for more years than most men could count. Wasn't expecting any. He turned toward the hallway. Stopped. Turned back. The auction tomorrow. Anyone can bid. The innkeeper laughed, short, dry, like corn husks rubbing together. Anyone with money, fella. He looked at Silas's boots again. That same curl on his lip. You got money. Silas did not answer. He walked down the dark hallway, boots thudding soft against the wooden floor, and disappeared into the room at the end. The innkeeper shook his head, went back to his ledger. Outside, the piano had stopped playing. The street emptied as supper time called folks home. And somewhere in a small room behind a general store, a woman named Clara Mills was folding a blue calico dress that did not belong to her, wondering what tomorrow would bring. There is an old saying out west, you cannot judge a man by his boots, only by what he does when they are worn through. If this story has found you tonight, I would love to know where you are listening from. Drop a little note and say hello. The mirror in Mrs. Margaret's back room had a crack running down the left side. Clara Mills stared at her reflection, split in two. She did not reach for powder, did not pinch her cheeks for color. She pulled the tie from her hair, let it fall past her shoulders, then gathered it again, tighter this time, twisted it into a knot at the base of her neck. Her hands were steady. That surprised her. Lord have mercy, child. Mrs. Margaret stood in the doorway, arms crossed, a fold of blue fabric draped over one elbow. The smell of flour and lye soap clung to her apron, mixing with the dried lavender she kept in her pockets. You got the face of someone heading to a funeral. Maybe I am. Hush now. The old woman stepped forward, pressed the dress into Clara's hands. Calico, faded blue with small white flowers, soft from years of washing. This was my mother's. She stood where you're standing once. Different auction. Same feeling. She paused. She made it through just fine. Raised 6 children and outlived 2 husbands. You'll manage too. Clara ran her thumb across the fabric, worn thin at the collar where someone had rubbed it countless times. Now put it on. Stand up straight. And quit thinking so loud I can hear it from across the room. The town hall smelled of cedar and sweat, and something else, cheap perfume mixed with the sharp bite of chewing tobacco. Clara stood at the end of the line, back against the wall. 12 women stretched before her, arranged like goods on a store shelf. Silk dresses, lace collars, hair pinned high with tortoiseshell combs that caught the light from the tall windows. She smoothed the calico over her hips, felt the small hard shape in her pocket, the brass sewing kit she had carried since she was 12 years old. When her father first taught her to mend a torn seam, the metal was warm against her thigh. Men filled the chairs up front, black vests, gold watch chains, cigar smoke curling toward the rafters. One man stood in the center of the aisle, wider than the others, laughing loud at something someone said. His teeth flashed when he smiled. One of them was gold. Garrett Cole. She had heard the name plenty. The front door swung open. Sunlight cut across the wooden floor like a blade. A figure stepped through, and the laughter stopped. Clara watched the silence spread. Heads turned. Whispers started, low and sharp as wasp stings. She did not look at the man's face. She looked down. Boots, cracked leather, thread hanging loose from a split at the toe. Her fingers found the sewing kit in her pocket. Garrett Cole's voice sliced through the room. Well, look who decided to show up. Judge Harold Brooks stepped onto the platform at the front of the hall. He moved slow, deliberate, like a man who had learned long ago that rushing never fixed anything. His jaw worked a plug of tobacco from one cheek to the other. Well now, he looked out at the crowd. Let's get this thing started. The first woman stepped forward. Victoria, dark hair pinned high, dress the color of fresh cream. $200. Garrett Cole's voice rang out before anyone else could speak. He stood with his thumbs hooked in his vest, gold tooth catching the window light. A murmur rippled through the room. Money changed hands. Victoria walked toward Garrett, chin lifted, and the crowd clapped. Clara pressed her back harder against the wall. 3 more women. 4. Names called. Prices shouted. The room grew warmer, thick with the smell of bodies packed too close together. Perfume going sour in the heat. Then silence. Judge Harold looked at his list, looked at Clara Mills. She stepped forward. The calico dress felt thin against her skin. She kept her hands at her sides. No one spoke. The silence stretched. Someone coughed. A chair scraped against the floor. Garrett Cole laughed, short and sharp. The seamstress who wants a wife with hands like a field worker. Laughter scattered through the crowd. A woman near the front whispered something behind her fan. Clara stood still. Her face did not change, but her fingers curled, just slightly, against the fabric of her dress. Then she heard it. More laughter, louder this time, coming from the corner where the stranger stood, the man with the broken boots. "Look at him," someone said. "Came to buy a bride with pocket lint. Those boots ain't fit for a scarecrow." Clara turned her head. The man stood alone. His shoulders were square, his jaw set. But around him the crowd pressed in with their words like stones thrown at a stray dog. He did not flinch, did not move. Clara's hand went to her pocket, found the brass clasp of her sewing kit. She did not think. She walked. The crowd parted. Not out of respect, out of confusion. She crossed the floor, past the rows of chairs, past Garrett Cole, whose mouth hung open mid-laugh, until she stood in front of the stranger. Then she knelt. The wooden floor was hard against her knees. She could smell dust and old leather and horse sweat. She opened the kit, drew out a needle, brown thread made from hemp, strong enough for cowhide. She began to stitch. The room went silent. The needle pierced the cracked leather at the toe of his boot. The hide resisted at first, then gave way with a soft pop. She pulled the thread through. Steady, even, again, again. The only sound was the whisper of thread against worn leather. She did not look up, did not speak. Stitch, pull, stitch, pull. Her hands knew this work, had known it since she was 12 years old, sitting beside her father in his shop, learning to mend what others threw away. The smell of leather polish and lamp oil, his voice, patient. "Every stitch is a promise. Clara, make it hold." Above her, she heard someone draw breath. Garrett's voice, sharp. "What do you think you're doing?" She did not answer. Stitch, pull. Judge Harold cleared his throat. His voice came slow, almost wondering. "Well now, ain't that something?" Clara tied off the thread, cut it clean with the small blade from her kit. The stitches ran neat and tight across the leather, closing the gap that had been there before. She stood. For the first time, she looked at the stranger's face. Lines around his eyes, a small scar on his chin, old and faded. His expression gave nothing away, but his shoulders, she noticed it now, had dropped. Just slightly. She turned back toward the line of women. Behind her, she heard Silas West take a single step forward. Clara walked back to the line. Her knees ached from the hard floor. A small spot of dust marked the hem of her calico dress. She did not brush it away. She took her place at the end, back against the wall, and kept her eyes forward. The whispers had not stopped. They buzzed around her like horseflies in August words she could not quite catch but understood anyway. She folded her hands in front of her. The brass clasp of the sewing kit pressed against her palm, still warm from her grip. Judge Harold cleared his throat. The tobacco shifted in his cheek. Well now, that was something. He looked down at the paper in his hand, looked up again. Silas West. The name hung in the air like smoke from a snuffed candle. Garrett Cole turned, his gold tooth catching the light from the tall windows. That fellow he got 5 cents to rub together. He laughed, loud and sharp. The men around him joined in, their voices bouncing off the wooden walls like stones thrown down a well. Silas did not answer. He stood in the corner where he had been standing all along. His face gave nothing away. The repaired boot, Clara's stitches, neat and brown against the old leather, rested flat on the pine floor. "Mr. West," Judge Harold's voice was patient, the way a man speaks to a child or a fool. You got a choice to make. Any woman here, if you can pay the fee. Silas reached into his coat. The room went quiet. He pulled out a fold of bills. Not coins. Bills. He did not count them, did not look at them. He held them out toward the judge, arm extended, eyes fixed somewhere past the crowd. Garrett's laughter died in his throat like a chicken with its neck wrung. Judge Harold took the money, counted it. His eyebrows lifted, just slightly, and he let out a low whistle. Well, that'll do just fine. He set the bills on the podium. Make your choice, Mr. West. Silas lowered his arm. Then he walked. His boots struck the floor with a steady rhythm. 1 step. 2. The repaired leather held firm. He passed the first row of chairs, past the second. Men shifted to let him through, their shoulders pulling back like he carried the smell of something dead. He reached Victoria first. She stood tall in her cream-colored dress, dark hair gleaming like polished mahogany. Her chin lifted as he approached. He walked past her. Her mouth fell open. A flush crept up her neck like spilled wine on a white tablecloth. Elizabeth next. Younger. Blonde curls framing a round face. She smiled, hopeful. Her hands clasped tight at her waist. Silas did not slow down. The whispers grew louder. Someone said something about the boots. Someone else mentioned the seamstress. Clara heard her own name pass through the crowd like a pebble skipping across still water. Then he stopped, right in front of her. Clara looked at his chest first, the worn fabric of his shirt, faded from too many washings, the color of a sky before rain, a button missing near the collar. Her fingers twitched habit, measuring the work that needed doing. She lifted her eyes. His face was weathered, deep lines at the corners of his eyes, the kind that came from squinting into sun and wind for more years than she had been alive. The scar on his chin was pale, old. His jaw was set, but not hard, patient, like a man waiting for bread to rise. He did not speak. He extended his hand, palm up, calloused, the skin rough and cracked at the knuckles, stained with dirt that no amount of washing would ever fully remove. A working hand, a hand that had held rope and leather and shovel handles since before she learned to thread a needle. Clara looked at it. Her own hands were no different. The same calluses, the same small cuts from needle slips, the same roughness that fancy ladies whispered about behind their fans. She placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers. Firm, warm, not tight, just certain. Garrett's voice cut through the silence like a blade through butter. What in the... Done. Judge Harold's gavel struck the podium. The sound cracked through the room. Marriage confirmed. Next. Silas did not turn around. He looked at Clara. You sure about this? Judge Harold asked, leaning forward on the podium. Sure. Silas's voice was low, rough at the edges like sandstone. Clara felt the weight of every eye in the room pressing against her skin. The whispers buzzed, but the hand holding hers did not waver. I haven't told you my name, she said. Quiet. Just for him. Silas's mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Something smaller. Something true. I haven't asked. He turned toward the door, her hand still in his. The crowd parted. Not out of respect, out of shock. They walked down the center aisle, past the rows of chairs, past Garrett Cole, whose face had gone the color of old brick. Outside, the afternoon sun hit Clara's face, warm, bright. The smell of dust and horse and summer sage filled her lungs. Behind her, the door to the town hall swung shut with a heavy thud. She looked at the man beside her, this stranger with the mended boots, and the quiet voice, and the hand that held hers like he meant it. "Where are we going?" she asked. Silas squinted against the light. His jaw worked, like he was chewing on the question, deciding how much of an answer she deserved. "Home," he said. Mrs. Margaret was waiting by the corner of the general store. She stood with her arms crossed, a bundle of cloth tucked under one elbow. Her face was hard to read, something between worry and satisfaction, like a woman who had placed a bet on a horse and was not yet sure if she had won or lost everything. Clara walked toward her. Silas followed a few steps behind, leading the old horse by its bridle. The animal's hooves scraped against the packed dirt, a tired shuffle that matched the weariness in its eyes. "Well," Mrs. Margaret looked Clara up and down. Then she looked at Silas. Her eyes lingered on the repaired boot, on the neat brown stitches running across the cracked leather. "Ain't that something?" She pressed the bundle into Clara's hands. Cloth wrapped around something solid, still warm. "Cornbread. Made it fresh this morning before all the foolishness started." Her voice was gruff, but her fingers squeezed Clara's wrist. "Road's long, sun's hot. You'll be glad for it before you get wherever you're going." Clara's throat tightened. She held the bundle against her chest. The warmth seeped through the thin fabric of her dress. "Mrs. Margaret." "Hush now." The old woman's hand came up, touched Clara's cheek. Just for a moment. Her palm was dry and rough, smelling of flour and lye soap, and the dried lavender she kept in her apron pockets. "You be careful. Here, but I reckon you chose right." Something in his eyes. "Reminds me of my Harold. Rest his soul." She pulled her hand back, looked at Silas one more time, her gaze sharp as a hawk sizing up a field mouse. "You treat her well, or I'll know about it, and I'll find you." Silas nodded. Once. Short. Mrs. Margaret turned and walked back into the store. The door closed behind her with a soft click, and the bell above it chimed once, lonely and clear. Clara stood there, holding the cornbread, the afternoon sun pressed warm against her shoulders, soaking through the blue calico. Behind her, she heard the horse shift its weight, hooves scraping against the hard-packed earth. "You ready?" She turned. Silas had moved to the horse's side, one hand resting on the worn leather of the saddle. "I can walk," she said. 3 miles, maybe more." "I know. I've walked further." He looked at her. His face gave nothing away, but something shifted in his eyes, a flicker, quick as a minnow in shallow water. Then he shrugged, a small movement barely visible, and started walking. The horse followed, bridle loose in his hand. Clara fell into step beside him. The road out of town was red dirt, packed hard by years of wagons and hooves and countless feet walking toward something or away from something else. Dust rose with each step, fine as flour, settling on the hem of her dress and coating the tips of her worn shoes. On either side, saguaro cactus stood tall against the sky, arms raised like preachers calling down blessings from heaven. Neither of them spoke. The silence settled around them, broken only by the steady rhythm of footsteps and the soft clop of the horse's hooves. Clara listened to her own breathing, listened to the creak of saddle leather baking in the sun. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried out sharp and lonely, circling something she could not see. She looked at Silas from the corner of her eye. He walked with his head up, eyes fixed on the road ahead. His stride was even, unhurried. The kind of walk that belonged to a man who had covered long distances before and expected to cover many more before he was done. "Where are you from?" The words came out before she could stop them. She had not meant to ask. Not yet. Silas did not turn his head. "Everywhere. Nowhere that matters. That's not an answer. It's the only one I got." He paused. His boots crunched against the red dirt. Worked cattle up in Montana for a spell. Before that, New Mexico. Before that, I don't remember. Started moving when I was 16.
I haven't stopped since. Clara absorbed this. The hawk called again. Further away now. Why? This time the question was different. Heavier. He knew what she meant. Silas slowed his pace. Not much, just enough that she noticed. Why what? Why the moving, or why you? Why me? He stopped walking. The horse stopped too, blowing air through its nostrils, grateful for the rest. Clara turned to face him. For the first time since they had left the town hall, she studied his face without pretending not to. The lines around his eyes were deep, carved by years of sun and wind and watching horizons that never got closer. The scar on his chin was old, faded to white. His jaw was rough with stubble, a day or two past shaving. He looked at his boots, at the neat brown stitches she had sewn into the cracked leather. You didn't ask who I was. His voice was low, rough at the edges like a file drawn across wood. Didn't ask what I had or what I could give you. You just saw something that needed fixing, and you fixed it. He lifted his eyes to hers. I've lived my whole life that way, seeing what needs doing it, not waiting for someone to tell me it's allowed. Clara felt the weight of the cornbread in her hands. The warmth had faded some, but she held it tight anyway. I understand, she said. Silas nodded. Just once. They started walking again. Their footsteps fell into rhythm, his boots and her worn shoes marking time against the red Arizona earth. The road curved ahead, rising toward a low hill dotted with mesquite and creosote bush. Beyond it, Clara could see the shadow of something, a structure, small and dark against the evening sky. Is that it? She asked. Silas did not answer right away. His eyes were fixed on the horizon, on the shape growing larger with each step. That's home, he said. But something in his voice made Clara look at him again, something careful, guarded, like a man holding cards close to his chest, deciding whether to show his hand or fold. She wondered what else he had not told her. The cabin sat on a rise overlooking a shallow valley. It was small, one room, maybe two, built from pine logs gone gray with age and weather. A stone chimney rose from one end, blackened around the top from years of smoke. The windows were narrow, framed in rough-cut wood, the glass wavy and thick like the bottom of old bottles. Clara stopped at the edge of the clearing. The last light of evening caught the windows, turning them the color of honey. This is yours. Silas tied the horse to a post near the porch. His hands moved quick and sure, the motions of a man who had done this 1,000 times without thinking. This is ours now. He climbed the steps. The boards did not creak, solid, well maintained. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. Clara followed. The smell hit her first, cedar and ash and lamp oil. Something else underneath coffee grounds, old and bitter, mixed with the faint sweetness of dried sage hanging from a rafter. The air was cool, still, carrying that particular quiet of a space where one person had lived alone for a long time. Her eyes adjusted to the dim light. A cast-iron stove squatted in the corner, cold and black, the metal gleaming dull where someone had scrubbed it clean. A table stood in the center of the room, rough-hewn from pine, the surface worn smooth by years of plates and cups and elbows resting. 2 chairs pushed against it, 2. She noticed, not one. A narrow bed against the far wall, covered with a wool blanket the color of thunderclouds. Shelves lined one wall, holding a few tin plates. A cup with a chipped rim, a coffee pot with a dented side, and books. Clara moved toward the shelf without thinking. Her fingers brushed the spines. 5 books. 6. 7. A Bible at the end.
its leather cover worn soft at the edges. The gold lettering on the front faded to shadow. She pulled it out. The pages fell open in her hands, soft and familiar, marked with a ribbon at Psalms. Someone had read this book many times, had held it the way she was holding it now, seeking comfort in the dark hours. My mother's. She turned. Silas stood by the stove, striking a match. The flame caught, small and orange, and he fed it into the kindling already laid inside. She passed when I was 17. Fever took her in the winter of 62. He did not look at her. That Bible's all I got left of her, that and her stubbornness, my father used to say. Clara closed the Bible, set it back on the shelf. Careful, gentle. Her throat felt thick. The fire began to crackle, throwing uneven light across the floor, making shadows dance on the walls like memories trying to take shape. Silas straightened. He looked at her, really looked for a long moment. Then he walked to the table, pulled open a drawer, took out a fold of papers tied with brown twine, and laid them flat on the wood. Sit down. Clara sat. The chair was hard beneath her, the wood smooth and cool through her thin dress. Silas pushed the papers toward her. His face was unreadable, but his hand, she noticed, was not quite steady. I don't know how to say this proper. Never been much good with words. Spent too many years talking to horses and cattle. He paused, rubbed the back of his neck. But you should know what you married into. Clara looked down at the papers. The first one was yellow with age. The ink faded but still readable. A deed. Land grant. The words swam before her eyes. Legal language she had never learned to make sense of. But the numbers were clear. 200 acres. Registered in the name of Silas West. Dated 12 years ago. A red wax seal at the bottom. Official and final. She turned to the next paper. Another deed. 50 acres more. Purchased 3 years later. Then another, and another. Receipts for cattle. Records of sale. A letter from a bank in Tucson confirming a deposit that made her breath catch. Her hands had stopped moving. She looked up. Silas stood on the other side of the table, his arms loose at his sides. The firelight caught the lines of his face, the stubble on his jaw, the old scar on his chin. He did not look away. 12 years, he said. Started when I was 22, working another man's ranch up in the Prescott Valley. Saved every penny I earned while other hands spent theirs on whiskey and cards. Slept in barns when I could have paid for beds. Ate beans and hardtack when I could have bought steak. He stopped. Swallowed. Bought my first 40 acres with 3 years of wages. Worked that land sun up to sundown. Then hired out to neighboring ranches for extra money. Did that for 9 more years. Buying when I could. Building something. Clara's mouth was dry. She swallowed hard. Why didn't you say at the auction? They laughed at you. Laughed at. They called you. I know what they called me. His voice was quiet, not angry, just tired, heavy with something old and worn. If I'd walked in there dressed fine, throwing money around like Garrett Cole, you think they would have seen me? He shook his head slow. They would have seen the land, the cattle, the bank account. That's all anyone ever sees when a man's got money. The money, not the man. Clara looked at the papers in front of her. The numbers, the signatures, the red wax seals stamped at the bottom of each deed. You hid it, she said, so you could find someone who would see you first. Not a question, a statement. Silas was silent. The fire popped, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney. Outside, a coyote called distant, lonesome. Yes. Clara set the papers down, folded her hands on the table,
her calluses caught against each other. Rough on rough. Why are you telling me now? Silas pulled out the other chair, sat across from her. The table was narrow. She could have reached out and touched his hand if she wanted to. Because you chose me without knowing any of this. His voice was low, rough as unplaned wood. And I figured you deserved to know what that choice means. Clara looked at him, at his weathered face, his rough hands, the mended boot resting on the floor, her stitches still holding firm. 12 years, she said. 12 years. The fire crackled, outside. The last light faded from the sky, leaving only the orange glow from the stove and the deepening dark beyond the windows. Clara picked up the papers, folded them carefully along the old creases, the way they had been folded many times before, held them out to him. Put them back. Silas took them. His fingers brushed hers, brief, warm. You're not angry. Clara shook her head. You didn't lie to me. You just waited to tell the truth. She stood, walked to the window. The glass was cold against her fingertips, the last heat of day gone from it. I understand. I understand exactly why you did it. Behind her, she heard Silas put the papers away. The drawer slid shut with a soft click. Tomorrow, he said, his voice carrying a weight she had not heard before. Someone's going to come asking questions. Clara turned. Who? Silas looked toward the door. His jaw tightened. Garrett Cole. He doesn't lose well. Never has. Clara woke to the sound of horses. Not one horse. Several. The hooves struck the hard-packed earth in an uneven rhythm, growing louder with each second, shaking the stillness of early morning. She sat up on the narrow bed. The wool blanket fell away from her shoulders. Gray light filtered through the window. Dawn had barely broken, the sun not yet risen above the eastern ridge. Silas was already on his feet. He stood by the door, one hand resting on the frame. His shirt was untucked, his hair flattened on one side from sleep, but his body was taut, every muscle drawn tight as fence wire. Stay inside. He pulled the door open and stepped onto the porch. Clara did not stay inside. She rose from the bed, crossed the room, stood in the doorway, her shoulder against the rough wood of the frame. 5 riders had stopped at the edge of the clearing, their horses stamped and blue, breath steaming in the cool morning air. Dust rose around them, catching the first pale light of dawn. Garrett Cole sat at the front. He swung down from his saddle with the easy grace of a man who had learned to ride before he learned to walk. His boots hit the ground with a soft thud. He reached up and adjusted his hat, taking his time, letting the silence stretch like taffy. Then he smiled. The gold tooth caught the light. Morning, neighbor? Silas did not move. He stood at the edge of the porch, arms loose at his sides. His repaired boot, Clara's stitches still holding firm, rested on the weathered boards. What do you want? Cole. Garrett took a step forward. His smile widened. Heard some interesting news last night. Seems the poor cowboy with the broken boots isn't so poor after all. He looked around at the cabin, at the valley stretching out below, at the land rolling toward the horizon. 200 acres, they say, maybe more. Quite a fortune for a man who couldn't afford a decent pair of shoes. The men behind him shifted in their saddles. One of them laughed short, ugly. Garrett's eyes moved to Clara. Morning, Miss Mills. He touched the brim of his hat. Or should I say Mrs. West, though I'm not sure that marriage is going to hold up. Fraud, you know. Man lies about who he is, what he's got. That's grounds for annulment in any court in the territory. Clara felt her fingernails dig into the wood of the doorframe. She did not speak. Garrett took another step, then another. He stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, looking up at Silas. You made a fool of the whole town. Friend. Walked in there dressed like a beggar. let everyone laugh at you. And all the while you were sitting on more land than half the men in that room put together. He shook his head, slow and theatrical, like a preacher lamenting a sinner. That's not honest. That's not the kind of man a woman should tie herself to. Silas said nothing. Clara watched his face. It was still unreadable. His jaw was set, but not clenched. His hands hung loose at his sides. He was not going to defend himself. He was waiting. Garrett turned to Clara. His smile softened, became something almost kind, almost gentle. The smile of a man offering help to someone who did not know she needed it. You can still choose different. Come back to town with me. I'll pay whatever price you want. Set you up proper, a real house, real dresses, servants, if you want them. He spread his hands, palms up, like a man with nothing to hide. You don't have to stay with a man who tricked you. Clara looked at him. She looked at his polished boots, clean and new, not a scuff on them, his pressed vest, the buttons gleaming, his gold watch chain catching the morning light, his face, smooth and handsome, the face of a man who had never wondered where his next meal would come from, or whether the winter would take everything he had built. Then she looked at Silas. His worn shirt, washed so many times the color had faded to the gray of storm clouds. His calloused hands, cracked at the knuckles, the scar on his chin, the lines around his eyes, carved by years of sun and wind and work that never ended. Her voice came out quiet, steady. At the auction, what did you call me? Garrett blinked. Pardon. When no one bid for me, when you laughed. Clara stepped forward, onto the porch, until she stood beside Silas. What did you call me? Garrett's smile flickered. A muscle twitched near his eye. I don't recall exactly what calloused hands. Clara held up her hands. The calluses were thick across her palms, built up over 16 years of needle and thread and work that bent her back and wore her fingers raw. You said who would want a wife with hands like a field worker. She lowered her hands. He never said a word about my hands. He just held them. Garrett's face changed. The smile vanished like morning frost under a hot sun. Something ugly moved behind his eyes, something that had been there all along, hidden beneath the charm and the gold tooth and the easy laugh. You're making a mistake. Maybe. Clara did not look away, did not blink. But it's mine to make. Garrett stood very still. His hands had curled into fists at his sides, the knuckles going white. Then he laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. It scraped against the morning air like a blade on stone. Fine. Keep your seamstress. West. Keep your hidden acres. But don't think this is over. He stepped back toward his horse. The town doesn't like being made a fool of, and neither do I. He mounted his horse. The other men turned their animals, following him toward the road. At the edge of the clearing, Garrett stopped, looked back. You'll regret this, Clara Mills. Both of you will. Then he was gone. The dust settled slowly behind him, hanging in the air like a question that had not been answered. Clara stood on the porch. Her hands were trembling. She pressed them flat against her thighs, willing them to stop. Silas had not moved, had not spoken. She turned to look at him. His face was still unreadable, but his eyes, she saw it now, were wet. The dust had barely settled when Clara heard more horses. She was still standing on the porch, her hands pressed flat against her thighs, when the sound rose from the road, a low rumble that grew louder with each passing second. Not 5 horses this time. More. Silas stepped forward. His body blocked hers, though she had not asked for protection. He came back, she said. Not just him. The riders crested the rise at the edge of the clearing.
Clara counted them as they appeared. 10, 12, 15. Men from town she recognized faces from the auction, from the general store, from the saloon where she had walked past 100 times without being seen. And at the front, Garrett Cole. But beside him, riding a gray mare with a white blaze on its forehead, was Judge Harold Brooks. The old judge dismounted slowly, his joints stiff from the ride. He adjusted his hat, worked the tobacco from one cheek to the other. His face looked tired, like a man who had been woken too early and asked to settle a dispute he wanted no part of. "Well now," he said, "this is a mess." Garrett swung down from his saddle. His face was different now, harder, colder. The charm had burned away, leaving something raw underneath, something that had been there all along. "Tell them, Judge. Tell them what the town decided." Judge Harold sighed. He looked at Silas, looked at Clara. His eyes lingered on her face for a long moment. "Folks aren't happy," he said. "Man comes into town dressed like a beggar, lets everyone laugh at him, then turns out to be one of the biggest landowners in the county." He shook his head slow. "That's not how things are done, not around here." Clara stepped around Silas. She moved to the edge of the porch, her bare feet cold against the weathered boards. "What are you saying?" Judge Harold met her eyes. "The town wants the marriage annulled. Says it was entered into under false pretenses." Garrett smiled. The gold tooth flashed in the morning light. "You heard him. It's over. Come back to town. Clara, we'll sort this out proper." Clara did not move. She looked at the men arranged behind Garrett, their faces hard, their eyes cold. She looked at Judge Harold, standing apart, his expression unreadable beneath the shadow of his hat. She looked at Garrett, his smile wide and certain, a man who had never been told no and expected never to hear it. Then she looked down, at Silas's boots, at the stitches she had sewn into the cracked leather, still holding firm. And above them, she noticed it now, a small tear in the fabric of his trousers. Just above the ankle, a seam coming loose. She reached into her pocket. The brass clasp of the sewing kit was warm against her fingers. She pulled it out, opened it, drew out the needle, the brown hemp thread. "What are you doing?" Garrett's voice had an edge to it now, sharp and thin. Clara walked down the porch steps. The hard-packed earth was cool under her feet. She crossed to where Silas stood. He had not moved, had not spoken, and she knelt before him. The ground was rough against her knees. Small stones pressed into her skin. She could smell the dust, the horses, the sweat of too many men gathered in one place. She threaded the needle. "Clara," Garrett's voice rose. "What do you think you're—" The needle pierced the fabric. Silence. Clara pulled the thread through. Steady, even, the way her father had taught her, 16 years ago, in a small shop that smelled of leather and lamp oil. Another stitch, another. She could feel the eyes on her 15 men, watching her kneel in the dirt, watching her sew a torn seam on a poor man's trousers. She could feel the weight of their judgment pressing down on her shoulders like stones stacked one by one. She did not care. Stitch, pull, stitch, pull. The thread whispered through the fabric. The needle caught this morning light, flashing silver with each pass. Judge Harold cleared his throat. "Well now." His voice was quiet, almost wondering. "Ain't that something?" Clara tied off the thread, cut it clean with the small blade from her kit. She stood, brushing the dust from her knees, and turned to face the crowd. "This is my answer," she said. "This is my choice. I chose him yesterday. I choose him today. I will choose him tomorrow." She held up her hands. The calluses were thick across her palms, rough and hard from years of work that had bent her back and worn her fingers raw. "He never asked me to hide these. He never laughed at them. He held them." Her voice did not waver. "That's more than any of you ever did." The men shifted in their saddles. Eyes dropped. Faces turned away. Garrett stood frozen. His smile had vanished. His hands hung loose at his sides, empty and useless. Something moved across his face, something that looked almost like recognition, like shame, like the ghost of the boy he might have been, before the gold tooth and the pressed vest and the easy cruelty became all he knew. He opened his mouth, closed it. Then he turned away. He walked to his horse, mounted without speaking, sat there for a long moment, staring at nothing, at the empty space where his certainty used to be. Judge Harold watched him, watched Clara, watched Silas. "I reckon," the old judge said slowly, "that the town can mind its own business." He spat tobacco juice into the dust. "Marriage stands." He mounted his mare, looked down at Clara one last time. "You take care. Mrs. West." The riders turned, one by one. They followed Judge Harold down the road. The dust rose behind them, golden in the morning light. Garrett was the last to go. At the edge of the clearing, he stopped, looked back. His face was empty now. No anger, no charm, nothing at all. Just a man who had lost something he could not name. Then he was gone. Clara stood in the clearing. Her hands were still. Her heart was quiet. Behind her, she heard Silas take a single step forward. His hand touched her shoulder. Light. Careful. She turned to face him. The sun dropped behind the ridge, and the sky turned the color of ripe peaches left too long in the heat. Clara sat on the porch steps, watching the light fade. Her feet were bare, still dusty from standing in the clearing. The stones had left small marks on her knees, red indentations that would fade by morning, but that she could still feel now. Tender reminders of what she had done. Behind her, she heard Silas moving inside the cabin. The clank of metal against metal, the soft hiss of water poured into a pot, the scratch of a match being struck, then the quiet roar of flame catching kindling. She did not turn around. The first stars appeared above the valley, faint at first, then brighter as the darkness deepened. A breeze moved through the clearing, carrying the smell of sage and cooling earth and something sweet she could not name. Crickets began their evening song, rising and falling in waves that washed over the land like water over stones. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called out. Another answered. The cabin door creaked open. Silas walked past her, 2 tin cups in his hands. Steam rose from them, curling in the evening air like smoke from a just snuffed candle. He held one out to her. She took it. The metal was warm against her palms. He sat down beside her on the step, not too close, not too far. The wood groaned under his weight. They drank in silence. The coffee was strong bitter, almost thick enough to chew. Clara let it sit on her tongue before swallowing. Her father had made coffee like this, back in the shop, strong enough to keep a man awake through a long night of mending. He used to say, "Too strong." She looked at him. His face was turned toward the valley, profile sharp against the darkening sky. "Yes," he nodded, did not apologize. "Tomorrow I'll make it," she said. "All right." The coyotes had gone quiet. The only sound now was the soft chorus of crickets and the creak of the cabin settling into the cool of evening. Silas set his cup down on the step beside him. He reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Clara recognized it, one of the deeds from the drawer inside, the one with the red wax seal at the bottom. He unfolded it, smoothed it flat against his thigh. The paper rustled in the quiet. Then he pulled a pencil from his other pocket. short, worn down to a stub from years of use. Clara watched his hands move. He wrote slowly, carefully, the way a man writes when he is not used to writing. The pencil scratched against the paper, soft and deliberate. When he finished, he held it out to her. She took it, tilted it toward the light spilling from the cabin window. Her name was there now, written in uneven letters beside his. Clara Mills West. The pencil marks were lighter than the ink around them, newer, but they were there, permanent. "Land's yours too now," he said. "Half of everything. That's how it should be." Clara looked at the paper, at his name, at hers. She did not speak. She folded the deed along its old creases, careful and precise, slipped it into her pocket, the same pocket where the sewing kit rested. The brass clasp warm against her hip. The two most important things she owned, side by side. "You didn't have to do that," she said. Silas picked up his cup again, took a long drink, draining the last of the bitter coffee. "I know." The stars were thick now, scattered across the sky like salt spilled on a dark table. Clara had never seen so many not in town, where the lamps burned all night and the saloon never closed, and the sky was always hazy with smoke and noise. "The windows need curtains," she said. Silas looked at her. In the dim light, she could not read his expression, but she saw him tilt his head, waiting. "What color?" Clara turned her face toward the east, where the sky was darkest. In a few hours, the first light would appear there, soft and pale, the color of forget-me-nots growing wild along the creek bed. "Blue," she said, "like the sky just before sunrise." Silas nodded. They sat in silence. The coffee grew cold in their cups. The stars wheeled slowly overhead, turning the way they had turned for 1,000 years and would turn for 1,000 more. "Do you regret it?" His voice was quiet, rough at the edges like sandstone worn by wind. Clara did not answer right away. She looked at the valley spread out below them, the dark shapes of mesquite and saguaro, the pale ribbon of the road winding back toward town, the distant glow of Redwater's lamps flickering on the horizon. "Ask me again in 10 years, she said. Silas turned to look at her. In the darkness, she could just make out the shape of his mouth, not quite a smile. Something smaller, something true. "All right." Clara lifted her cup. The coffee was cold now, bitter on her tongue. She drank it anyway. "This coffee is terrible," she said. "I know. Tomorrow I make it. You said that already." "I meant it." Silas set his empty cup on the step, leaned back, his palms flat against the worn boards. Clara leaned back too, her shoulder brushed against his. Neither of them moved away. The kerosene lamp burned in the window behind them, casting a warm yellow glow across the porch. The night stretched out before them, vast and quiet and full of stars. They did not need to say anything else. There is a weight that settles after a story like this. Not sadness. Exactly. Something quieter. Something that feels like remembering a door you once walked through, or a hand you once held without knowing it would matter. Many of us have stood where Clara stood unseen in a crowded room, waiting for someone to look past what we lack and find what we carry. Some of us have been Silas, hiding what we have because we feared being wanted for the wrong reasons, and perhaps a few of us have been Garrett, realizing too late that the thing we dismissed was the thing we needed most. These feelings do not need to be understood tonight. They are allowed to sit with you, unfinished. The way all true things remain unfinished. It is enough to have listened. It is enough to have felt something familiar move through you. Even if you cannot name it, the lamp is still burning in that cabin window. Clara and Silas are still sitting on that porch, shoulder to shoulder,
watching stars they did not have to earn. Thank you for staying until the last light faded. Thank you for listening.